Good morning, church and visiting friends. My name is Kia Walton, and I will be presenting on the Great Migration. In Isabel Wilkerson's seminal work, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration, lives unfold onto over 500 pages of masterful storytelling. Focusing on the narrative of three journeys, Wilkerson skillfully creates synecdoches of her subjects, using their stories to tell the larger story of a dramatic change that, over its course, completely transformed the cultural landscape of the United States of America. The Warmth of Other Suns is a due recounting and recognition of the impact that Black Americans, Southern Black Americans, had and continue to have on a nation their foreparents built, as they left in droves from the Jim Crow South to repopulate the cities of the North and West. It is thorough, it is heartbreaking, and it is heartening. But beyond that, it is necessary. Wilkerson explains, I began this work of what I saw as incomplete perceptions outside of scholarly circles of what the Great Migration was and how and why it happened. The Great Migration, Wilkerson defines as the decades-long mass exodus of approximately 6 million Blacks from as far east as Florida and far west as Texas to the northern cities, inclusive of but not limited to Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey, Oakland, and a little town they called Richmond. In the wake of their arrival, difficult to pinpoint as a particular moment in time considering the steadiness of their flow, misconceptions of what these migrants brought with them colored their reception. Thought to have packed into their bundles and suitcases a sluggishness and a sweet Southern ineptitude, violence, and a drain on an already weak welfare system, Southern Black migrants have been misrepresented, if represented at all, in history. To the contrary, Wilkerson deftly unearths the truth about Black Southern migrants, that by and large, they had lower welfare rates, maintained more two-parent households, attained higher levels of education, and were less likely to engage in the violence that throttled urban Black communities than their Northern Black counterparts. This point Wilkerson makes is not intended to pit Northern Blacks and Southern Black migrants against one another, but rather to put facts and figures on the front lines to combat the myths, stereotypes, assumptions, and ultimately blame of the conditions of Black urban communities. It was not Ida Mae Brandon Gladney's thick Chickasaw County, Mississippi accent, proudly maintained some 61 years later after her arrival into Illinois, that created the gang-ridden streets of Chicago's South Side. Like Philadelphia, like Los Angeles, like Oakland, like so many now Black urban centers, Chicago was and is symptomatic of government neglect, resource withholding, and good old-fashioned racism. Wilkerson asserts what these Black migrants actually did was pave the way for Black migrants and their offspring to create better, at the very least, livable lives for themselves. These brave first steps made by the South's servant caste towards a freedom ever promised but rarely felt, unbeknownst to them, made a way for future immigrants to build new and better lives as well. White flight, contrary to what the afeared white masses hoped, would not address the Negro problem. Urban centers and America as a whole had to rethink its policies and prejudices directed towards the outsider. Ironically, the hardest working citizens its nation had ever seen. Back in the South, this steady exodus dating from 1915 to 1970 crippled the Southern caste system. The laboring classes of Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and Alabama were leaving quietly in the night, clanking up the railroads to the north, sputtering past state lines to concrete cities that promised at least a chance. Landlords, or post-Reconstruction slave owners, whichever term you prefer, would open well-rested eyes to find the tillers of the land, the mammies, the drivers, the whipping boys and girls, gone. The South had to contend with the fact that the greatest migration in American history was occurring. The servant class was disappearing, or at least relocating. Black Southerners were hung up by a noose and admired by a salivating white crowd, were taught to accept second-class citizenship, trained to live in fear and subservience, disgustingly overworked, disgracefully undercompensated, reminded at every turn that they were thought to be inferior and were deserving of such treatment, and yet could not be broken. She writes, "They did what humans have done for centuries when life became untenable. They did what human beings looking for freedom throughout history have often done. They left." This, Wilkerson notes, was done without permission. It was an act of freedom that acquired freedom. It sung out the dignity of a people and simultaneously carved out an unimaginable new America. Wilkerson writes with an air of curiosity about the great if. What would have occurred if the Great Migration had not? It cannot be known, she writes, what course the lives of people like Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Diana Ross, Aretha Franklin, Michelle Obama, Jesse Owens, Joe Louis, Jackie Robinson, Serena and Venus Williams, Condoleezza Rice, Nat King Cole, Oprah Winfrey, Berry Gordy, astronaut Mae Jemison, the artist Romare Bearden, the performers Jimi Hendrix, Michael Jackson, Prince, Sean P. Diddy Combs, Whitney Houston, Mary J. Blige, Queen Latifah, the director Spike Lee, the playwright August Wilson, and countless others might have taken had their parents not participated in the Great Migration. It is equally as important of a question when one ponders the direction of local lives, of small-time souls. Where would we be had Black Southerners not laid down their plows, swallowed their yes'ems and no sirs, packed up their children, left their families piece by piece to piece a life together somewhere else, complete with a strange and different plight, that of the Southern Black migrant, new Northern Negro? It is not a question to which I can even pretend to know the answer, nor is it the question that concerns Wilkerson's work. Hers is the exploration, the honoring, really, of a people's charge, individually chosen, but collectively experienced, to feel the warmth of other suns. Thank you.